Chair.
Before. Good evening, everyone. I now call to order the Thursday, September 28th, 2023 meeting of the City of Sugar Land Planning and Zoning Commission. Good evening, folks. Good evening, commissioners. We will jump right in. We will start with item 2, public comment. It looks like we have one speaker that signed up for public comment. So, Gary Foreman, I'll come on down. Good evening, sir.
Let's see. So I got a chance to speak. That's great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You bet. You have 3 minutes.
While I was at a public meeting with the HOA at Sugar Creek last week or this week, this plan, mixed-use development plan, was talked about a little bit. And while a public hearing and city council approval is required to rezone a property to mixed use, a development plan is not required. Thus, a property can be rezoned to mixed use without taxpayers or the city council knowing what the developer plans to eventually build. Moreover, once a property is rezoned to mixed use, there are no further public hearings and no further elected official approvals required under the current plan. All responsibility for development of mixed-use properties is shifted to city staff, essentially stripping the planning and zoning committee, you guys, the city council, of oversight and input on mixed-use development plans. Thus, a mixed-use property can be developed without official taxpayer representation in the approval process. Furthermore, the proposed code shifts even more decision-making power away from the city council to city staff by allowing the director, whoever that's going to be, to approve numerous changes and modifications to the code, further eroding the elected official responsibility and accountability for the mixed-use developments. In addition, many of the developments under the proposed mixed-use code will be allowed to develop a set number of units by right. And that's going to be in any regional activity center or neighborhood activity center. Currently, mixed-use developments and regional activity centers could potentially be granted to 350 apartment units. By comparison, Imperial Lofts has roughly 250 units, and this can be done without city council oversight of the development process. The currently proposed mixed-use code effectively eliminates the checks and balances in the development process by removing elected officials from oversight and accountability to the constituents for mixed-use developments within the city. Elected official representation in the development process is a time-tested and proven method which has enabled Sugar Land to become an attractive suburban community while maintaining community values, as evidenced by a recent livingability.com article ranking Sugar Land the 5th in the United States out of the top 100 places to live. The tax-paying residents of Sugar Land deserve a process that guarantees their elected officials take into consideration public input regarding the potential negative impacts and of the large residential components of mixed-use developments on schools, traffic, flooding, crime, and other matters. Therefore, the people that I know in Sugar Land strongly oppose adopting a mixed-use code without requiring public hearings and city council involvement in approving the proposed development plan.
While the change may be...
Sir, we're over 3 minutes. If you'll briefly conclude, please.
I'm sorry?
We're over the 3 minutes.
Okay.
If you'll briefly conclude.
Okay. In that case, I thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I hope I made some sense for you guys.
Can you state your name and address for the record? Your name and address for the record.
Just state it. So
My name
it's
is Gary Foreman. My address is 46 Bendwood Drive. That's Sugar Land, Texas, 77478.
Thank you.
And that's in Sugar Creek.
Thank you, sir. We have anyone else signed up for public comment? Last call. All right, we'll move on to item 3A, consideration of an action on the minutes of the July 27th meeting. Commissioners, you've got the meeting minutes in your packets. Any comments, or do I hear a motion? I've got a motion to approve by Commissioner Brown, a second from Commissioner Landine. Any other discussion? All right, please vote. And that motion passes unanimously among the commissioners present. Thank you, commissioners. We will move on to item 4A, workshop. Review of and discussion on a development code update for a mixed-use zoning district for redevelopment of the Fleur campus in Lake Point. Ruth Lomer, Assistant Director of Community Planning and Redevelopment, good evening. I just want to make it clear, this is a workshop for review and discussion. There's no consideration and action or any vote scheduled for tonight on this item, correct?
That's correct.
All right, take it away.
That is really loud. Okay. Good evening, commissioners. Yes, we are here to talk about a development code update and some other components to get Lake Point ready for redevelopment. So I'm going to start with just kind of a project update, kind of background on the project, tell you a little bit about our new approach since the last time we were in front of you, and then we're going to start diving into a specific review and discussion on a part of the draft code, and then we'll tell you about our next steps. So just as a reminder, our 2018 land use plan provided us direction to evaluate the best way to implement regional and neighborhood activity centers. Staff has been working with a consultant for a couple of years to study what other cities do and see the best way to implement redevelopment of mixed-use areas, and through that process, a recommendation came out to create 2 new mixed-use zoning districts. So as a result of that, we initiated a project to draft a mixed-use zoning code. Did that for a little while, and the most recent work that we did with the commission and council was we had a joint workshop with the 2 groups both in May and then most recently in July. At that July workshop, City Council directed us as staff to really focus on the 2 top redevelopment priorities in the city, and that is Imperial and Lake Point, more specifically the Fleur development in Lake Point. So Imperial is already kind of underway with the plan development process, so it will continue down that path. But now Lake Point is going to use the new mixed-use district. Following that July 19th workshop, City Council received a presentation from Plain Community Developers, who is a potential developer looking to purchase the property of the Fleur site. And they presented a concept to City Council for redevelopment of Fleur. And so I just wanted to share a couple of the images that they shared during that presentation. You received the full slide deck in your agenda packet, but this is just a concept for what could be developed on the existing Fleur site. In this example, they do include keeping one of the buildings that's on the Fleur campus, and then redeveloping, and so this includes different kind of middle housing types and some office and retail, multifamily. It's kind of a range of uses. So this is just kind of another viewpoint, not what the buildings would actually look like, but just sort of blocking what that could look like. And then a rendering of sort of their core pedestrian area. Again, just a concept of what could be developed on this site.
And Ruth, I'm sorry to interrupt, you ran through that pretty quickly, but just to be clear, the slides that you just showed, those were part of the presentation that was made a couple weeks ago?
Yes.
And that's available to the public in some other place? Okay, thank you.
Yes, it is, and it was an attachment to the P&Z agenda item, and so if the public wants to see these and then all of the rest of them, they are available there or attached to the City Council agenda item as well. And so we were moving forward with creating 2 new mixed-use zoning districts based on the direction that we received from City Council in July. The project is now focused solely on making Lake Point, and more particularly Fleur, ready for redevelopment. And so there are 3 really necessary actions that need to take place. in order to do that. The first one is amending the land use plan. The second one is creating the new mixed-use zoning district, which is the work that we've been doing. And then the last one is rezoning the Fleur campus to the new mixed-use zoning district, because as we've talked about, with zoning, there is the text and there's the map. And so number 2 creates the text, and number 3 applies those regulations to a particular property. So just a little bit more detail on each of these, the first one being the land use plan amendment. As I mentioned, our last update was completed in 2018. Obviously, a lot has changed since that time. The office market has changed significantly. We've had a pandemic. And so what we're seeing here is that residential uses are going to occupy more of this site than was originally anticipated. Additional residential uses are going to help support active streets, the desired retail for the area, as well as food and beverage uses. And it will be the most viable use really in the coming number of years is what's anticipated. And so what we expect is that there will need to be a change to specifically the areas of change section in the land use plan, which really is targeted to the Lake Point Regional Activity Center. And so just to get everybody oriented, this is the area that we're talking about. So the Regional Activity Center is the dashed line that goes along all around kind of Lake Point area. So this is Highway 6, this is 59, Whole Foods is right here where the label says Whole Foods. Fleur Corporation is here. This is all the lovely seas of parking, but with some really great trees in there too. And then you have the existing residential in the Lake Point development here, and then along Creek Bend Drive across from St. Luke's Hospital. So the second is to create the new mixed-use zoning district. So our development and current development code includes 17 zoning districts. So we will have one additional zoning district added to that, and it will be specifically for the Lake Point property. The district sets the standards and processes for development, but the property must be rezoned for it to be applied anywhere. And so we have evaluated the draft mixed-use code that has been presented to you previously, and it has been refined with specifically the Fleur redevelopment kind of as our focus and in mind. The third action is actually rezoning the Fleur site to the new district. So as we've talked about before, any kind of rezoning can be initiated by a property owner or by the city. And so the city is going to be initiating this rezoning of the Fleur property to the new district. And this is consistent with council's direction and their priority for Lake Point being one of those top 2 priorities for redevelopment in the city. However, I do want to reiterate, rezoning does require review by the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. Both boards both groups will have public hearings. The commission will make a recommendation to City Council, and then City Council will take action through an ordinance if they so choose. As part of that process, we'll also be doing a mixed-use concept plan, which you may remember we've talked about as well. This is a new process that's being created by the mixed-use code. It will provide us the opportunity to evaluate proposed developments and their relationship to the surrounding area, so for this particular site, so we can ensure that negative impacts are minimized and evaluate the location of proposed uses, building orientation, connectivity, location of major public spaces. But also the idea is to allow flexibility so that as the market changes over time, because obviously 52 acres is not going to be redeveloped overnight, it's going to take 10, 20 years. We need that to be able to be responsive to the market. And so the goal is for it to be flexible. So then back to the map here, this is where the site in particular that we're talking about, which would be rezoned and redeveloped. It's about 52 acres.
So just to be clear,
yes,
I apologize for interrupting.
That's okay, no problem.
So the dotted line is the current Regional Activity Center
sir.
for Lake Point, correct?
Correct.
And what we see here that's shaded in white,
Mm-hmm.
that is what is at least being discussed as potentially being rezoned to mixed use,
To the new
correct?
district,
So
that's
it's only
correct.
that part, it's only that shaded part?
Correct.
Okay,
Right,
thank you.
so it will not include the existing residential or the existing Whole Foods or any of the rest of the Regional Activity Center. It's just that 52-acre property that is anticipated to redevelop in the near future. Okay, so as I mentioned, we have revised the code based on feedback we received at the July 19th workshop. You as the commission are going to have 3 opportunities to review and discuss the revisions to the code. So tonight we're having our first workshop where we're going to review sections 2-118 through 2-122. That's what you received in your packet in advance of the meeting tonight. At the end of October, we'll have our second workshop where we will review the remainder of the sections. And I also want to note, I know a lot of the community concern that we've heard has been around kind of the processes related to applying mixed use and how it gets developed. That is not in the sections that we're talking about tonight. That will be in your next grouping of sections. And so I would just ask that you hold the conversation on that until we have that in front of you, because we are actively making changes to those sections. What you saw before, what the public saw before, is going to be different from what comes to you next month with the rest of the sections.
Ruth, which section was that? We just repeat.
Sure. It's the section that's more about the process, the procedures, specifically related to the mixed-use concept plan, how it gets reviewed, who sees it, who's involved in the process, that kind of thing. And so it happens to be kind of the end of the draft code, so to speak. And then we are anticipating on November 14th that we will come to you for probably multiple public hearings and recommendations, because those actions that I mentioned are likely going to be 3 separate actions. There might even be a 4th one. We're like I said, we're still kind of actively working through exactly the mechanics of it. But at that point in time, we would be asking for your recommendation to move forward to City Council. And just want to note that your substantive and timely feedback is necessary for making the Fleur site ready for redevelopment. So as I mentioned, we do have a potential developer that is actively working towards purchasing the property. And so our timeline is based on some work that they're doing. While this particular rezoning isn't specifically tied to entirely that development, we want to get it ready so that if that does come forward, then it can happen. So we're sure.
So, like, we have to hear from we get to hear from this developer before,
Likely,
okay.
more than
Would
likely.
that be like before the October 26th?
It'll either be at October 26th or at the November 14th.
Okay.
So following the commission's review and recommendation, we'll go to City Council likely in December. And then, as I mentioned, the timeline is reflective of kind of that necessary schedule for the concept that was presented to City Council on August 22nd. So now I'm going to get into my slides that are on the code itself. So what I wanted to do is each slide kind of covers a section or a part of a section, and I just sort of briefly highlight what has changed since the last version that you saw. And what I'd like to do is on each of those slides, go ahead and pause and see if the commission has comments, questions, or changes to that section of the code as I'm walking through, rather than me going through it all and then coming back. And so, as I said, this is your chance to ask questions and to kind of dig into the code with us. So please don't hold back. Give us whatever you have on these sections of the code. If there is something that comes up after tonight that you'd like to bring up to us, feel free to, you did get a link to the Word document. I know at least one person was having some struggles with that. So if you're not able to get in there, let us know. We're going to try and do some troubleshooting to see if we can get that to work. But it would be very helpful for us if all of the comments were consolidated, because we are on that compressed timeline. It would be great if they could all be in one place. But if you have comments, hard copies that you'd like to hand off tonight, we'll be happy to accept those from you as well.
Ruth, before we get into the more detail-oriented
Sure.
pieces, in our packet was a couple of pages of the land use plan.
Yes.
You can defer this to later if this is not the right time
Sure.
to do this, but I'm curious that it's indicated it was revised in June of 23. Is that something that you want input from us on, or is any of this new, I guess, is really
No,
what I'm asking?
that's the existing, that's what's in the plan right
Right.
now. The revision was I think that was the Imperial revision, wasn't it?
And that's fine, I don't,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
and Ruth, as long as we're not, like, what you're saying is that I didn't go back and compare the original to whatever's
Right.
in front of us, so I just wanted to be sure there wasn't anything substantive
No.
changed in what we had in our packet.
No, that was just for your reference to know
Perfect.
what
Okay.
exists in the land use plan today. So when we mention the land use plan, the areas of change section, you know what we're talking about. But what you have in there is the same content that was approved with the 2018 plan. That's a good question, though. Thank you for bringing that up. Are there any other questions I can address before we jump into the meat? Okay, very good. Okay, so in the draft code, just kind of some overall revisions, we've removed references and associated regulations specific to the mixed-use neighborhood since we're not moving forward with that district. We also just kind of generally reassessed it for clarity and sort of asked ourselves if it was achieving the goals for redevelopment. You know, is it clear? There were a few sections that were pretty lengthy, specific descriptions or regulations that we replaced with defined terms instead to make it a little bit easier to read. We asked ourselves, is it direct enough? Is it too prescriptive? And so where you see some changes there, that's kind of how we got to some of those changes, was sort of asking ourselves, are we really getting where we want to be with redevelopment?
So I'm going to stop you on that.
Sure.
Just for some clarifying questions.
Okay.
So what the version that we have is redlined against what was generated by the task force that was a joint P&Z and council task force, and then what was discussed at a couple of joint meetings, correct?
So, yes, so the red line is comparing the public version number 2, which you would have seen at your July meeting.
Right.
To what is being proposed now.
Right. And in that public version number 2, that was a broader proposed or
Yes.
potential mixed-use zoning regulation
Correct.
that affected both neighborhood activity centers and regional activity centers, correct?
Yes.
And so since what's now being discussed is applicable only to Lake Point,
Correct.
which is a regional activity center, the bulk of the changes that we're seeing in this is you've deleted all the references to neighborhood activity centers because Lake Point isn't a neighborhood activity center.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Correct. Yes, and you do have both a clean copy and a red line version. So if you have questions or want to make comments, just let me know which one you're looking at, and I can refer to the right one if you're on a certain page. But yes, that red line was there to kind of help you. If you did a lot of detailed review on the last version, then you could sort of compare and see, you know, what changed and what didn't.
Yep.
Okay, so diving into 2-118, the bulk regulations on the non-residential multifamily mixed-use development. Yes.
Ruth, can I ask a question?
Sure.
For the audience that's out there
Sure.
that probably doesn't have this packet, is there any way to share on the screen?
The document?
Yeah, a way for the audience to see what
I
you're,
don't think that there is, but it is available online. I know that's not helpful at this very moment, but they could potentially go back and
Is the
reference
red
it
line
later.
published online, do you know?
Yes, both
Okay.
versions are
Okay.
online on the website. If you go to sugarlandtx.gov/activity centers, that's our project webpage, and both of those documents are online.
Great.
Okay, so we have recommended removing the maximum building height and just allowing for the maximum airport height to prevail in this district, which is consistent with how our B2 general business district is regulated. And then specific to middle housing on the next table, 2-118.2, we had regulations for cottage court kind of in 2 different places, and we found it probably a little bit confusing. And so we consolidated it all into this particular table so that all of those regulations for the different middle housing types are in one place.
Okay, so just to be clear for commissioners as well, the plan is you're going to go through these couple sections one at a time. Right now, we're on 2-118, correct?
Correct.
And you're going to walk us through that, and then you want comment just on
Correct.
that section?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, so like my next slide is 219. So
Well-
we're on 218. So if you have comments on 218 now would be,
I definitely do.
Okay, great.
Anyone else? I mean, we'll hear from everyone. So let me give you mine first. I don't
Okay.
mean to jump out of order. Okay, so I'm looking only at the red line, all right?
Okay.
So this is on page 5 of the red line.
perfect.
I've got some questions.
All right.
Okay, so on the building height maximum, it's proposed to read 28 feet or a 1.5, or a 1.5 maximum stories. So, to me, that's a little bit unclear.
Okay,
Because like, is there a height restriction, is there an existing height restriction on 1.5 stories?
right, it's just for middle housing, so just to be clear, that's actually just for cottage court. We have, I don't know that we have 1.5 in our other districts, but we have 2.5, for example, in our, several of our standard zoning districts, and that's 2.5 or 35 feet, and so, this
But
would be-
is the intent here that even if it's 1.5 stories, it can't be higher than
28 feet,
28 feet?
yes.
Okay. You might want to make that clear. Right,
Okay.
because it's, when you say 28 feet or 1.5 maximum stories, that suggests one or the other. So maybe putting the maximum
Ah.
back
Oh,
in.
Or a maximum of 1.5, maybe the words just got put in the wrong order. We'll relook at that, thank you.
Same,
I got it.
same comment with respect to other middle housing.
Okay,
You've got 50 feet or a maximum of 4 stories. Probably you want a maximum of 50 feet, right? No matter how many stories you have.
yes,
Because we're not going to vote on something that says, you know, I've got 4 stories, they happen to be 20 feet each, so
right,
I'm going to exceed the 50. So that's
Got
the
it.
problem with having or in there.
okay, we'll
Okay.
clarify,
And then a question on the cottage court common space.
yes.
So that's new, that wasn't in before. And so-
Actually, it was just in a different
It
location.
was just moved?
Yes.
Okay. And was the 200 square feet for dwelling, is that all just a move from where it was before?
Yes.
Okay. And the same thing with E, on the next
Correct.
page, the cottage court
Correct.
dwellings?
Yep, that was just
That's just a move?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's nothing new, and whatever it was before, you've already received feedback before.
Yep, and I tried
Okay.
to go in and note those, and I realized as I was going back through, I missed a couple, so my apologies for that, that was one of
Okay,
them.
that's all I've got on that one
Okay.
section. Anything else on that section, commissioners?
Is common space defined
Yes.
somewhere?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me where?
I think it's actually on the next, it's that E, it's, I guess it's not defined per se, but it says what counts the central common space can include, but it's not limited to open space, pool, clubhouse, or other community amenities. So it's 200 per unit, that's just how you calculate it, and then obviously the common space is all collected in the middle.
Yeah.
So if you have 4, then you would have to have 200 times 4, 800 square feet.
So, I mean, I'm familiar with the concept generally. I don't know that I have an actual edit to put forward, but you can imagine a scenario. I think what the intent here, I believe, is to create a common communal area that's available to all residents at any given time, right? And when you start talking about pool and clubhouse and things of that nature, you know, I don't know how I'm sure there's a set of best practices about what these actually look like, but, you know, I just think it needs a little more clarity, or maybe just a relook at how it's, you know, really, really precise definition of what is considered common, and then what happens if it's not accessible at all times, that kind of thing.
Okay,
Whether it's a
so your
pool or a
concern would be
clubhouse.
that it be accessible at all times to residents, or?
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine if you know, if I purchased one of these, and part of what I'm purchasing, even though I don't own it, is the access to the common area, right? So, you know,
Okay.
I'm sure there's a creative way to deal with that, and it may not be an issue, but I guess my urging there is just to be sure that that is an intentional definition that is,
Okay.
that's, you know,
We can take a look at some other city codes and see how they handle it. I know we got a lot of this from a different city, I don't remember which one, but we kind of liked their approach, and so we can see if there's any others that get into that a little bit more.
And I guess on that point, the individual home survey would determine where the property line begins and ends or I guess the plat. where the individual's home begins and ends, and then where the common space begins. And so
Right.
how you do that calculation, I think, becomes fairly tricky. And I don't know that the development code, I assume that's what needs to speak to how that gets dealt with.
I guess I'm not following, because it's per unit as opposed to per
Yep.
square foot of and some of these may or may not be subdivided. Like it could be just one large reserve where there's multiple little cottage court bungalow, that share that open
So if there
space
were
in the
five, if there
middle.
were 5 of these, then the reserve would have to be 1,000 feet.
Right, exactly.
That makes sense. And as long as meets y'all's satisfaction from a definitional standpoint,
Okay.
I think that all makes sense. But
Okay.
there's a lot of things there that maybe we can't necessarily anticipate, but we would need to be sure that others are, that we're following some sort of established way of doing that.
Okay.
Anyone else on this section?
I have a question about, I guess, permeable versus impermeable areas on each one of these lots. I read through this thing a dozen times. I can't find anywhere in it where there's any talk about any of that to go along with like flood control, water mitigation, or anything like that. Is there anything in there that I missed?
No, that's not in this part of the code. I think that would be addressed in the design standards. Yes, my colleagues are shaking their heads. So that would be in a different section of.
So shouldn't it be in there so the guys that are gonna take this and build off of it know what they're gonna have to do?
So while you're looking at it as a standalone document, it's gonna just be part of the overall development code. And so anybody that comes in to develop knows that they've gotta look at the whole thing, not just one segment of it. And so that, when they design their subdivisions, the pavement and the water and wastewater, all of that's in the design standards. And so that's the same place that they would look for that information as well.
Okay, well, you lay out just about everything in here. And that's just something I saw was completely missed. I understand that there's guides for how tall the curbs are and, what the slope of the sidewalk is and everything like that. I get that, but it's not listed anywhere. And generally in the city, isn't it like 75-25 on residential type of lots?
Oh, you're talking about lot coverage, maybe.
Yes.
I don't think it's.
And would those numbers go over to these cottages?
I'm not sure about that. Maybe you have an answer.
So, we're talking about lot coverage, you're talking about the drainage permeable versus non-permeable when we look at different developments?
I'm talking about all of it.
Yeah.
Because, in one of your pictures, you have 5 nice little cottages, and you have a common space, and you have some parking over here, and I don't see anything where there's basically any permeable on that. So to me, that looks like just one big gully
Right.
washer.
Because this code, like the other standard non-residential and residential districts, don't prescribe necessarily that point of detail. Every developer, residential, non-residential, has to go through and look at all the chapters of the development code. So there is a chapter specifically on the design standards, which includes all of your utilities. So any development's gonna have to go through and run those drainage calculations, and
Okay.
that's what's gonna determine how much permeable paving versus non that they would need on each kind of block that you're seeing on here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the only reason I bring that up again is you lay out almost everything in here. And to me, it's a big miss. I see a lot of flooding in the city, especially in my old neighborhood. So I want to make sure that's addressed in this where you can't say, well, we just missed this and
Yeah.
somebody's house is flooding down the road.
Yeah, it's not gonna be addressed in here because they still have to go through permitting processes, which require those type of calculations to be done. Just like we have to, do calculations on, like I said, the drainage, utility capacity, all those calculations have to be done when you look at a development on a permit by permit, plan by plan basis. So it won't be necessarily prescribed in here, because we've got it in the other standard kind of sections that
Okay,
we use
so-
for all development.
This is only one part,
Mm-hmm.
so like the electrician still has to come up with a load analysis for
Mm-hmm. Yep.
the whole
Yes,
project or?
yes. Yeah,
Okay.
so this is gonna operate just like when the Shake Shack went in across the street. They came
Okay.
in under the general business B2 zoning district. They developed with those bulk regulations, setbacks, heights, your lot coverage, those kind of things. But then they also went through exactly what you're talking about when they
Okay.
went through their permitting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question.
Go for it.
Fencing, I'm going to assume is going to be covered under code?
Fencing, is that what you said? Yeah.
Because, okay, I'm asking because, you know, I can picture all these cute little houses and everyone's going to want to keep their dog in their yard. And I just, for the sake of consistency, right, I think that's something you should give some consideration to, at least the two types that are allowable, whether that's wrought iron or whatever, just so that the developer coming in will have an understanding of height maybe and type of construction, just a consideration.
Next section?
Next section.
Okay. Great comments, thank you. Okay, so section 2-119 is lot layout and site design. This is where we establish the requirements for the pedestrian realm. In this section, we clarified where the pedestrian realm is required, and that also that the clear zone may be covered. That was not totally clear before. We also made some changes to the parking location, size, and pedestrian connectivity section. We rearranged this section for clarity, so it looks like something got deleted or there's a whole new piece, but really they just kind of got moved around. And then clarified that off-street parking must be located behind a primary facade, which is a new defined term in the draft. That's 119.
Yeah, so my question is under A, so I'm on page 9
Okay.
of the red line. So there's a sentence that's redlined at the bottom. I'm going to read the whole sentence, okay? Just especially for people that aren't looking at the document.
Great.
But the last sentence says, this may include, but is not limited, well, actually, it says, this may include, but is not limited to seating, streetlights, waste receptacles, fire hydrants, traffic signs, bus shelters, transit stops, bicycle racks, and public utility equipment such as electric transformers, water meters, and similar elements. Which, when redlined, it will now say, this may include transit stops, bicycle racks, and similar elements. So my question is, essentially, is there some intentionality behind why only those things are enumerated? Given the fact that you're saying it may include, but it's not limited to?
Right.
So is that mobility related for some reason?
That's a good question. I believe we included a defined term there. That would be the pedestrian amenity zone. And a pedestrian enhancement zone. Okay, so there's a new definition on page 40. Is a component of the pedestrian realm intended for the placement of street trees and street furniture in a manner that does not obstruct pedestrian access or motorist visibility. This includes, but is not limited to seating, streetlights, waste receptacles, fire hydrants. So basically, we've moved all of that and put it back here. If my memory is failing as to why we left those two in when we moved all of the rest of it to the back. So
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anybody else that has a recollection or if that's something we want to provide next time, but
Well, think about that, because if that's a defined term, then you
We
should
may be
say,
able to
then you
just
can
take
be
it
able to
out.
say it should consist of a clear zone and a pedestrian enhancement zone. And then you've got that definition wherever it goes.
okay. We'll take a look at that. Thank you.
That's all I have. Other comments on 2-119? All right.
Okay, great. This is a very short slide. Page 2-1, or slide, section 2-120, pedestrian realm enhancements. We just made some really minor changes and some clarifications on this one.
Which is why I have the most comments, probably.
Perfect. What page are you on?
Okay, I'm on 11.
Okay,
Okay, so first, for your consideration, for 1 and 2, I think you could probably delete the word location and just have on-street parking and off-street parking. Just consider that. But my question is this. So for the on-street parking,
Okay.
it says that angled, perpendicular, or parallel parking that is designed to function as on-street parking may be permitted if it meets the following 2 conditions. So it has to meet both of them, correct?
Yes.
Okay, the following 2 conditions, and that, I guess that's why it says and, okay. So it says may be permitted if it meets the following 2 conditions. So does that mean that you can have something that meets those 2 conditions that still isn't permitted?
That's a good question.
And I know there's a lot of changes of shells to mays in here, so I get why that's probably swept up. But consider whether or
We
not.
will look at that.
Consider whether, yeah, it's intentional that you have some discretion still built in or not. So I would think about that one. And then, all right, I'm on page 12, so I guess it's B, whatever the main number is.
I think it's actually 2-119 still, yeah. So we'll
Okay.
go back.
And then it says off-street surface parking lots, which I think you've eliminated lots from your other definitions. So think about that.
Thank you.
Loading and service areas must be designed to minimize impacts on adjacent residences. What does that mean?
That means that they shall be located away from shared property lines and screened from neighboring residences.
Okay, so if that's the edit, then I think you should say that, because I wouldn't get any guidance from saying I have to minimize impact. I mean, I know conceptually what that means, but this doesn't tell me, like, how am I supposed to do it? Just, well, you're supposed to minimize the impact. Well, okay, well,
So it needs to be clarified that the second
yeah,
sentence
I mean, if you
is
mean
a-
something specific there,
Okay.
use it. And then I think also consistent, you could delete the word lot from 3, parking lot size. Because it seems like you're trying to get rid of
Maybe
the
it
word
should be
lot.
off-street parking or something like that. We'll see.
Okay.
Okay.
And then so I'm now on I'm now on sub 5, which is on page 13.
Okay.
Again, both 5A and, 5A and 5A3 still have references to lots.
Yeah.
So think about whether you want that
Yep.
in there. And then on the next page, on page 14, for 6B, it looks like. All right, pedestrian walkways, I think that, capitalize the W, I think that's a term of art.
Thank you.
Okay, and then 7.6 on the next page, page 15. I don't know if this is right or not, but mid-block pedestrian connection, if that's a term of art, you should capitalize that too.
I don't know if it is or not. I don't know if we have a, I
And
think
I
it's-
just saw that in the figure it is, but maybe that's just
I
because
think
it's
it's
in
just
the
because it's
figure.
a title.
Yeah,
We'll
so
double
sorry
check.
for the nitnoid stuff, but that's what I got on that section.
Okay.
Anyone else on this section?
I have a question. On your parking lot size, under item 3,
Which page? I'm sorry.
page 12, 3.
Okay.
It
12.
says, except for multifamily developments over 50 units.
Uh-huh.
What's your definition of a development? If his developer does 240 units developments side by side? Or is that building? Is that better defined as a building?
We will consider that. I'm not sure. How would we define that? Okay.
Because you could essentially manipulate the rules if you underbuild and to get surface parking where you want it without having to build
I
the
see.
structured parking, and I think you need to define that a little bit.
Okay. Okay. So I think that gets us to the end of 2-119. 2-120 is on 16 and 17 of the red line, and this is the one we just had a few minor changes and clarifications throughout. Any comments on this section?
Yeah, under top page 17.
Okay.
Under A, I don't get why. So you have two options, but you took out the or. See what I'm saying? Then I don't know, if it's just and, I don't know how you read those as options.
I shall not be required to provide additional. We'll get some direction from our legal team on the best, if that should be and or. There were
You just
times where we.
did. No, I'm just kidding, I'm just kidding, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Okay, fair enough. And y'all have looked at the points that you,
Yes.
for both new development and redevelopment, and that's, y'all believe that's the right number when we're carrying what was brought forth before now over to Lake Point? You still think that's the right number?
Yes,
Okay. All right.
okay,
I have a question.
sure,
Can you go back to the slide 2119?
sure.
See where you're showing the clear zone and then you're saying minimum clearance? Is there a required minimum clearance for that clear zone? And let me explain to you why I'm asking that question, because in other cities,
To the building code, right? Yes, I think it's in the building code.
building code does not define it.
We will confirm. It's our understanding that it does, but we will confirm.
Yeah, I know it doesn't. So the reason I'm asking you the question is because other cities do actually write in that amendment, and that has to do with the access of fire
Right,
truck.
right.
So some cities would require nothing less than 12 feet. And the reason it's important is because if you don't define it, then it correlates back to the stud size and the cost of reaching a 12-foot clearance to the underside of that overhang. So while you're at it, you might want to look into this.
Okay, we will double check.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Go for it.
Page 16,
Okay,
item 1, it talks about spacing of light poles, and spacing on center. Is that better served by trying to achieve a foot candle lighting level versus spacing them differently, or is the spacing because you're trying to meet the geometry of the build?
that's a good question. We can look into that.
It would make sense that we would set this up so that you're trying to achieve a lighting level versus spacing of your poles. But I'll
Okay.
leave that to the engineers.
I don't think that's something we considered. That's a good observation. Okay,
You're 2 for 2.
anything else on 120?
Here, I have one.
Sure,
On page 16, number 3,
okay.
the parking shall be designed to limit curb cuts and
Okay.
most efficient park vehicles. I don't understand why that's there, because curb cuts are usually used for driveways or something coming in. If you have parking on the street, you wouldn't cut the curb.
So that specific, number 3 is related to the private garages and surface parking for residential, which has the image on page 15 at the bottom of 15. So essentially, if you can serve multiple homes from a single driveway cut, that's the preferred, that's the direction that it's providing, is to limit curb cuts as much as possible.
Right, I understand the curb cuts,
Mhm.
but to me, it doesn't make sense to what you're trying to get done.
Okay, do you have any suggestions for how to further clarify that?
I would, if you wanted to go towards driveways, put in driveways, mitigate curb cuts for driveways.
Okay,
I mean, because that doesn't, to me, as a former builder, it doesn't make sense.
okay,
That's all I have.
all right. Section Section 1-121 starts on page 18 at the bottom. So section A is building arrangement. This is one of the examples where there was sort of a lengthy description within the section, and we felt like it was more helpful to just define some terms. And so you'll see those new terms, streets and civic spaces, added to the back of your packet in chapter 10. And then building orientation and siding, section B, is where we require the primary facade orientation to the street unless there are site conditions that necessitate other orientation. For example, if you're on a civic space, like here in Town Square, where we want you to orient your building towards that civic space, or if there's a natural geographic feature adjacent to the site or on the site as well. And replace, again, a lengthy description with a defined term or primary facade.
Okay.
So we can go ahead and do A and B, and then I'll do the next slide.
Oh, let me make sure I'm not ahead of you. A and B. I think I'm on B. So I'm on the top page 20.
Okay, top of page 20. Okay, that's actually the next section, I think,
Okay.
but I don't have C, so there you go. Okay, go ahead.
All right, forgive me if these are obvious questions or if I'm missing something. So number 3 says on corner lots, a minimum of 30% of the side street building facade shall be located within the build-to zone. So primary facade is a defined term, right? And so I just want to make sure side street building facade is something different.
Yes.
Okay. And I don't know if you wanted to define that or not, but I just make sure it was different. And then I didn't see, I probably missed it, but is there a definition or a drawing somewhere that shows what the build-to zone is?
That's a good question. Let me see. It might be, I don't think we have it yet. I think since that was a new term, we need to work on the graphic, but it would definitely show up in that beginning section where we show this is your front setback and this is the maximum building line. Like that would be your build-to zone. So that's where that would be shown.
Yeah.
And then actually on this graphic, we need to add that label too.
Yeah, as long as it just needs to be shown.
Sure.
Sure, okay. And then if I'm jumping ahead, tell me, I've got a question on D, but if you want to, I can hold on that if you want to do.
Why don't I go ahead and do, well, there's D, E, and F, but D is building entrances, and so this requires that buildings have a primary entrance, another new defined term, on an adjacent street, civic space, or natural geographic feature. We have ground level design in section E, where we've replaced at grade with ground level for clarity. Simplified some requirements for ground level coverings, where this got into canopies, awnings. There were some very specific requirements, and we felt like we need to just really focus on the intent and allow some design flexibility there. So essentially just say it needs to have shade and weather protection, and then there's some kind of minimum parameters provided. Section F is about building form. And so here again, we've simplified requirements for building mass to again focus on the intent, which is really to create a pedestrian focused environment. And so they're required to differentiate between the ground level and the upper levels. We had heard some feedback that the way that we had it drafted, it was really focused on kind of classical architecture and may preclude some more modern designs. And so tried to evolve that a little bit so that it could be a little wider open from a design standpoint. And then section related to transitions to existing residential was moved from a different section up to this section because it was kind of about building design. And so that gets us through the 121 section.
Okay.
Any other?
So on D, page 21.
21, okay.
Here's my question. So 1A, the sentence that starts with, if a natural geographic feature such as a waterway or other major landscaping feature, et cetera, then it says each building shall have a primary entrance connecting to the feature.
Okay.
I don't know that this is a problem, but I want to make sure that there's no conflict between that requirement and the pedestrian connectivity requirement.
Okay.
Because that requirement, I think if I'm remembering it correctly, says that you've got to have some direct connectivity. I'm trying to find it now.
You said the pedestrian walkway.
Yeah. Anyway, I just want to make sure that there's no, I don't think there's a direct conflict, but I just, where you're going to have that natural geographic feature, I just want to make sure that you're not asking people to do two different things on that.
Okay, we'll take a look.
To my fellow commissioner, on page 18, there is a commentary on rainwater collection in table 2.1. So that's in
There
there.
you go. Incentivizing.
Okay. That's all I have on that one.
Okay.
Anyone else?
I have a general comment. I can't find it. I circled it in my paperwork, but there
Okay.
was a talk about the public seating areas, and if I was certain it was in relation to a small park or a small seating area, and it just contemplated shade as being a requirement.
Okay.
What's the definition of that? Is it a small tree that will someday be shade? Is it is it artificial shading? What percentage of that area would you expect it to cover? But I think that's something you might want to clarify. I
Okay.
can't find it, but I know
Is it in the pedestrian amenities or the
I-
enhancement options
I
maybe?
thought so, but I can't find it, but I did circle it earlier. Maybe I imagined it, but I don't think I did.
Page 18. Second from the bottom, page 18. Shade provided for seating in areas using canopies, pergolas, trees, and other coverings.
Okay.
Is that what you're talking
I
about?
believe that's it.
Okay,
Yeah, I read that.
we can
Oh.
take a look at that.
And let me and if I can clarify my comment, so I think I misspoke when I said pedestrian connectivity.
Okay,
But a little bit later on, where in section, I'm in the right section, in E on ground level multifamily,
which page are you on?
25.
Oh, okay.
So it's this one, all buildings that have residential unit floor plates within 6 feet of finished grade must meet or shall meet the following requirements. And see, then it talks about primary front door entrances that are accessible from the pedestrian realm and that kind of stuff. That's really what I want to make sure there's no conflict between that and the section that pertains to when there's a natural geographic feature.
Okay.
Because on one hand, you've got to have a primary entrance connecting to the feature. And now here you've got to have a primary entrance that's connected, that's accessible from the pedestrian realm.
Right.
Maybe that's not a problem,
Okay.
but
We'll double check
think about that.
the wording on that. The idea, obviously, is that if you are adjacent to a feature, there should be a connection to it. And so you may be connecting to a pedestrian realm, or it may be a sidewalk, but there's some kind of entrance that, you
Yeah.
know, gets you there.
Yep.
But we'll make sure that that's
Okay.
clear.
Okay, and then is page 28 still in the section that we're dealing with? Is that still in 2-121?
Yes, it is.
Sorry, it was really hard to see the,
I know, I apologize.
Section
It gets a little,
titles.
that's
No,
why we
no,
give
no,
you the
no.
clean one too.
but I think it
just
is.
hopeful that it would
So
be a little
28, I
cleaner.
think, is still in here.
Mm-hmm.
So on new item 4, transition to existing residential.
Yes.
Okay, so that first sentence, there's a word that needs to be added.
Okay.
Currently, it says new development shall be designed to minimize impacts on existing homes and the privacy of residents to the maximum extent practicable. It should be to minimize impacts on existing homes and maximize the privacy of residents. You can run that by your legal team. Right, you don't want to minimize the privacy of residents.
Indeed.
And I know maximum effect practical is in there, but you should put maximize in there. That's my
Understood.
humble suggestion. What did I have on this one? I couldn't tell if facade is a defined term or not. So just look, I don't think that it is, so just ignore me on that one. And then maybe the last one on this, maybe not. I think it is. On table 2.1, well, it's the table on page 31,
Okay.
just needs to be, I think, retitled to 2-121.1.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. I'll get that
All
cleaned
right,
up.
y'all be happy to know I do not see any more, wait a second. That's all the red marks I have on mine.
Okay.
Hey Ruth, real quick, on
Sure.
page 28, the 360 degree architecture.
Yes.
That's that's like the Bed Bath & Beyond rule, right? Where it was visible from the freeway, and so we've changed that now to require it to match the other parts where it's visible.
Right, basically you can't have a cinder block back, you know, where you can see it from around. I mean, it needs to be similar in character to the rest
Yeah,
of
I
it. It's
guess,
not gonna be exactly the same.
So
but-
to be more precise, the development from years ago, I guess it was the Michaels and over by just the other side of Costco, where you could the extended.
They have a wall there.
I'm sorry, I don't know the right term of art, but where the sign actually protrudes above the building line, but you could, it was visible from the freeway basically, and it was, we all agreed that it was not an acceptable finish out, so we've talked about requiring that to, basically the brick to extend back to,
Oh, I see.
am I making sense?
I think
Sorry, I'm
so.
not. Parapet, thank you. So when I first saw that, that's what I thought of, but this is not what that is articulating.
Not particularly, no. It's more so that the back of that building
Yeah.
is brick, like the front and the sides essentially.
So-
We can see, I don't know if anybody has thought, we'll take a look at that. We'll take a
Yeah,
look.
take a look at that, and I wonder too if there's, especially when it comes to building height, you know, are there any considerations that need to be made about, you know, views from taller buildings onto, you know, ones not as tall? You know, obviously, there's gonna be air conditioning units and things that
Right.
are on roofs that
Right.
are, you know, just an accepted piece, but
Right,
and to the extent that we need to think about that,
Okay.
I just flag it.
okay.
I have a question. Do you define the floor area ratio in this? Since you've gone as far as defining the height for cottages and other buildings, and you're now referring to airport height being one of the restrictions. So does this address floor area ratio also for commercial areas?
No, we don't have any floor to area ratio requirements here.
So anyone can build as much as they want and go as high as they can?
As long as it's, yeah, it would be limited by the airport height. So that would allow for mid to high-rise buildings, which is what the land use plan envisioned for the site.
But then isn't that in contradiction to requiring a pedestrian engagement zone? And I may be changing term on you because I'm used to some other words, but from this proposal, you're trying to enhance pedestrian or public engagement to the development that comes forward.
Right.
But if you don't define a floor area ratio for whatever the size of tract is, then no one has a goal to work towards, right? Why would I give up? And now I'm consider that I'm a developer. Why would I give up my expensive land towards pedestrian engagement if I can build it out? You have no restriction.
I guess I'm not following. I mean, we have the minimum requirements for the pedestrian realm and then the requirements for the ground floor.
You
apologize,
don't.
I'm not following.
You're not telling me that I need to be X feet away from my property line, and I can only build X percentage, or what is my floor area ratio? You're not defining it, right?
It's the setbacks that are defined as opposed to.
But
height
that's still not a FAR. That's just step backs, right? I can step back, and then I can come and I can just go as tall as I can.
Yes, that's the way that it is drafted right now.
So
It's our understanding that it's not likely that all of these sites are going to be developed with a high rise. It's just not practical or reasonable for this site. There might be one or two if we're, you know, lucky, but.
But
I
that's
don't-
leaving to chance, right? I think that when you have a development code and then you're working so hard to define terms and look at the language from may to shall and all of that, but you're leaving out such an important component, which is FAR.
I guess we saw it a little bit differently.
So it is the intention of
I mean, we didn't include the FAR, actually, we don't have FAR in any of our commercial districts, and so that wasn't specifically evaluated. We did talk about having a maximum height, but we wanted to provide them the flexibility, to see what the market brings.
Because it ties back to the term build to zone. Build to zone has to do with, can you build 1:1 ratio? Like, can I go as a straight line, or a build to zone is actually that I go up to a straight line at a distance of 45 feet and then scale back 25 degrees. I mean, that's build to zone. That's how build to zone diagrams are. So if there's no
Might be using
FAR,
a different term for build to zone. What we're talking about is the area between the minimum and the maximum setback where your building has to be located.
that's just setback, right?
Yeah.
So build to zone ties back to FAR, but I think I don't really care about the build to zone. It will be one-on-one and we can go straight is what I'm seeing, but I think the FAR should be defined. Because what happens is that when you have a defined FAR and then you want to have pedestrian engagement, and when somebody comes out and gives up a lot of their land for pedestrian engagement and plazas and things that, like entrances towards your amenable site areas, then you actually do sit down and calculate how much of the land you have given up in excess of what was required, and then you get a credit for it times 5, 3, 4, whatever, and you add that back to your FAR, and now you can develop larger and bigger buildings because you've done what the intention of the city was. You've done a plaza, for instance.
Yeah, I think that could be one approach to it. I just don't think that's the approach that we've taken or that we're recommending.
So as a developer, I just have to meet the minimum. I just set my building back 20 feet if that's required and call it a public engagement space.
No, there's the pedestrian enhancements that are required as well. And then if you have a site that's over 5 acres, you have to dedicate 5% of the land to civic space. And so that's where I think some of those plazas and other things would come in.
Let me jump in because I want to make sure that staff is receiving your comments. So I think I'm hearing two different things, but I'm not sure how they're connected. So maybe we can flesh that out a little bit. I think I understand the point on the building height restriction would be there isn't one, and it's whatever you can allow under the airport code. I'm probably
Right.
saying that wrong. And that's all, as we sit here today, that's the case for any other commercial
For our
property, correct?
B2 and BO, maybe, I think BO.
But
BO, our business
meaning that
office.
in that particular zoning category, there's not a separate height restriction than what would come under the air.
Correct.
So but what I'm not understanding is, are you saying that there's a relationship between the height of the building and whether there is or isn't pedestrian access? Because that one I don't understand, because it seems like if you have a 2-story building, you've got the pedestrian access requirement, if I'm reading this correctly. If it's 10 stories, you have the same requirement. So I'm not understanding how the height is connected to the pedestrian access.
Okay, so let's just say that the site is 1 acre and there's no FAR requirement, which means if there was an FAR requirement, then it would have meant that, okay, if you have 1 acre, then you can only develop times 3. So you can develop, so your floor area cannot exceed 3 acres. Now, whether you pack that 3 acres in 5 stories or 10 stories is up to the developer. But if there's no FAR, that means if my site is 1 acre, I can build a very tall and skinny building and pack in 10 acres worth of floor area. Because there's no restriction other than, yes, I have to look out for the airport height restriction, right? I can buy a large parcel. Let's just say your airport restriction is 100 feet. I can buy a very large parcel and there's no FAR requirement, so I just give you the 20-foot front setback, 5-foot setback on the site, and now I can pack in maybe 10, 15 times what my site area is, because there's no restriction on how much I can develop, how much floor area I can generate. There's no restriction.
I mean, it would also be limited by parking. You'd have to park it, and then there's detention requirements and.
Yeah, but I don't have to do surface parking. I can go underground.
Not
I mean, I'm
underground,
just, I'm
but maybe a
raising
parking
questions
garage.
because a a document is being created, not just for the next couple of years, but this document will survive, you know, for a very long time, and how things will change and how people will look at it when there are fewer restrictions, then you know, you can push the limits on that.
Again, I think our charge is to prepare Lake Point for redevelopment, and so that's what we've attempted to do. And we felt like this was the best approach to that.
No, that's fine. I'm just questioning that there's no FAR. Am I misreading it? And the
No,
answer
there
is
is not.
no.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Farina, are you suggesting we should make an amendment, or it should be considered?
Yeah, I
We're not-
mean,
we're not
that's
taking
what
that.
I.
I know tonight we're not, I'm just
Yeah.
making a discussion point.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I would recommend, that there should be some thought towards that. We should have, I mean, there should be a discussion on how much can you develop. If you don't have a height restriction other than the airport height, which will vary where you are on the site. Unless someone has done a study and you can tell me that it's restricted to 65 feet across the board, entire
No, I don't have
52
that
acres.
number. I don't have that number off the top of my head.
Yeah, so I think I mean,
If we were to have an FAR, what number would you suggest?
I haven't seen what the parcel division would be, like how will this get replatted into smaller tracts?
Yeah, we don't know what that looks like either.
Yeah. I can only speak from experience, and I've seen them restricted to three times the site area, and in just 3 times the site area, you can pack in a lot of stuff. So, and then I've seen where if you do an enhanced public engagements, then you know you get a credit for that, and you can increase FAR because you apply to planning board and you say, okay, you know, I'm doing so much to increase public visibility and engagement and all that. So, you know, I deserve a credit, so I can then push my FAR to meet the numbers I need to meet for a certain development. So I think 3 is where typically we start from, and I think that's a good number.
Okay, so I think the ask is give some consideration
Okay.
and let us know where you end up on that.
What would be the intent of including an FAR?
To limit how much you can develop. If there's no FAR, you just keep going vertical if there's no limit.
Yeah, I think we just want to understand what the intent is here, because I think the intent of this code is to prepare the area to redevelop. Who knows? So we need to be able to be flexible to respond to the market, and so I think our concern is if we put more prescriptive, restricting things in the code that aren't in our standard non-residential codes, then we might be taking a step backwards. I think that's so that's why we want to understand what y'all's intent is of wanting to add something that would restrict and limit potential future flexibility of the
Well,
site.
because
Yeah, well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
because I'm in the dark right now, because I don't know what your height restriction is on this 52 acres.
There's not one right now.
So the airport height, we don't know what that is, right?
Right, just like in our standard office zone.
Right.
Yeah.
And so and this area does not fall under FAA regulations.
Likely
You-
not. It's
You
not
don't
in the
need a
flight path.
permission from them to develop to a certain height. So as a developer or as an architect, I'm seeing that there's no height restriction at all. There's no FAR. So probably not today, but in 10 years from today, you could be seeing a high rise on this tract, right?
But so I think what you're asking is, so
Which is
what's
what
the,
the land
what's
use
the
plan
concern
covers.
about that? Let's play that out. Right, okay, let's assume that's right. And let's assume a developer comes in 5 years, 10 years from now and builds a structure up to the maximum allowable FAA height. Okay, what's the concern? Just that it's tall? I'm not trying to be sarcastic. I think what y'all are asking is, it's flexible on purpose so that you don't artificially prescribe it. And I'm saying, is there a concern with the height? Is it because you can pack a lot of residential units in there? Because that you can't do, right?
Right.
Because that's regulated already.
Regulated in a different
And
way
I'm
with the
guessing,
land use
and I'm
plan,
just
yeah.
guessing, the market is going to probably dictate, unless the market could be different in 20 years from now. I don't need a 20-story office building because it's going to have 40% occupancy. So I think for my money, the question is like, what is the concern about the height of the structure?
I think the concern is that as a city, there is a certain vision, right? So is the vision, like, we're not New York. So if we were New York, we wouldn't care about the height. But you're creating a district, you're creating a new, this is a new mixed use.
A new zoning district.
A new zoning district, right? So this is not what Sugar Land is about. And so I think as a city, do you want to start thinking about it? That, I'm just asking the question.
So what I'm hearing is the concern is that you could just have a tall building.
I think I would say as a city, we did think about it because it's in the land use plan. It talks about mid to high rise in certain regional activity centers. That's why they were created. And so, one of the reasons. So I think it was talked about. You know, we have pockets and large areas of business office zoned property where you could have 10-story buildings. Now, it probably wouldn't fit, and you wouldn't be able to park it, but I don't think that, I don't think it wasn't talked about and it wasn't envisioned.
I'm just saying that FAR is a tool for planners, right?
Yeah.
And it's a very popular tool, and that's the first thing we go look at. What is the FAR?
And we do use it for residential. We use
Right.
it for all of the homes, sure, certainly.
So I'm surprised that it's as a tool it was not used there.
No.
And it is a new regional, it's a new zone, it's a new district. So,
But it's just a standard district. It's not a PD, so it's just a standard district that's going to have similar regulating parameters like our other non-residential districts. So again, I think we'll just kind of leave it.
Well-
We're happy to continue to talk about, but our goal was to not be limiting and not be restrictive and have it open for business, open for redevelopment.
Okay, so the request was to get a little more detail on whether that's been considered or not. I think we need to continue that conversation, but what I'm hearing from you, Lauren, and others is it was considered and it's intentional, so we need to consider,
It's true.
you know, whether or not we're cool with that or not, I guess.
Yes.
And the other thing I would say that I think would inform this discussion down the road is knowing what the maximum allowable height under the FAA rule would be.
We can bring some of that back.
Because I think that would at least put we know that would put an upper limit on it, and it would be helpful to know what that is. I mean, I don't know how that stuff works, but it's reasonably close to the airport, so I'm guessing.
Yeah. We have to look.
Okay. Other comments on 2-121? All right, is that all that we're looking at tonight?
I think that, and then we also had the definitions in the back. Actually, 122 is on there too, but it didn't make it into my slides. I don't know, but I did that on purpose, but it's a very short section, so if you have anything on that.
Others made, did anyone have
32 and
anything on?
33.
Did anyone have anything on 122 or the definitions?
Minor changes there.
I did not.
Yes, and then definitions, we've provided some new definitions, which I mentioned most of them earlier. I don't think we made any changes to the existing ones, so.
Okay. So is that all you want us to look at on this ordinance tonight?
Yes,
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. One other thing.
okay.
So for the benefit of folks that are here that have an interest in this, that have made it this far,
Yeah.
could you go back and put up the timeline again
Sure.
for what's going to come back before us and when it's going to go to council? So we're doing workshop 1 right now. So on October 26th, some other sections of this proposed code is going to come back before us.
Correct.
For just a workshop.
Correct.
No vote.
Just like we did tonight.
Right, and then the expectation, subject to change, the expectation is we'll publish a notice and we'll have a meeting on November 14th that includes a public hearing
Probably multiple.
on the whole thing.
Yes,
Plus, I heard you to say, plus if there's changes to the land use plan, so that would be potentially multiple. But that would be the earliest date that this body would look at something for consideration and action, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I think it's helpful for folks to know that.
Yes, sir.
That's
And,
great.
yeah, there's a typo there. It's just, right, three approvals right now. But yes, that's what's coming to you. So we
Okay.
it very well may be that we have public hearings associated with each of those items. We're still trying to figure out the best way
Okay.
to do that. So,
But no vote earlier than November 14th as
Correct.
it currently stands? Okay,
Correct.
great. All right. Thank you.
okay,
We'll go to item 5A, liaison reports. So we haven't met in a while. So there's 5 city council meetings on here, and we have 2 commissioners absent. So does anyone here have a liaison report for any of the 5 meetings that are listed on the agenda? I'll ask it that way, because I'm guessing no. And my request for staff and of the secretary, do we have one? Am I missing something?
Yeah, I listened to the September 19th one.
Go for it.
There was nothing really related to planning and zoning except for this meeting and the discussion about how Lake Point and Imperial were going to be the first on agenda. And then the rest of it was budget, things that are not related to this committee.
Okay, thank you. And if I could just ask staff and maybe the secretary's office, so I noticed today we just got the liaison list for the upcoming year. It would be really helpful when we put this on the agenda if we could cross-reference that to the list so we know who is supposed to give the report. I think that would help us going forward. I'm gonna call you out. Or just know if you're not here, then I'm not gonna go, who's got the
Or
report?
turn in the report even if you're not going to be here.
Or do a written report. Yeah, I think that would be helpful from my perspective, so thank you. Okay, any other business? City staff report, thank you. I forgot. 5B, well done.
It's okay.
Mr.
So
Vice Chair.
October 10th would be your next meeting. I don't think we're going to have any items on that, so we'll see you all back on October 26th for the second workshop of this. Next week, October 3rd, at council will be reappointments of boards and commissions. So that'll be on Tuesday, and then we'll get in touch with you all for oaths of office and all that. So we'll be in touch with that.
Thank you.
That's all. Thank you.
Anything else? Got a motion to adjourn? I've got a second. That passes unanimously. Good night, folks. We're adjourned. Thank you.
All right, it's been real.
That has been great, as always, my friend.
You're doing some heavy lawyering there.
Well, you know, hey, man,